So, imagine you're sitting in this like really sterile, brightly lit conference room. You know the kind.
Oh, yeah, fluorescent lights buzzing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you're wearing a suit you definitely don't normally wear to the office.
Right, never a good sign.
Yeah. And across this big, heavy mahogany table sits a plaintiff's attorney. Because, well, there's been a terrible accident involving one of your company's trucks. A family is in the hospital.
A literal nightmare for any fleet manager.
Literally. So the attorney, slides this piece of paper across the table, clears their throat, and asks you this seemingly innocent question like, can you tell me your company's operational definition of the word driver?
Oh, man, that is a trap.
It's a total trap. But you're sitting there, you blink, you think about it for a second, and you just say, well, a driver is the person we hire to drive the trucks, the people on our driver payroll.
And right there, the attorney smiles.
Yes, that cold, terrifying smile. Because in that single sentence, you've just proven to the court that you, the manager of a motor carrier, have absolutely no idea what the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration regulations actually say.
You basically just handed them a multi-million-dollar negligence verdict, like right on a silver platter.
Exactly. And welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. If you are managing a trucking company, whether you're a fleet director, safety supervisor, owner, operator, whatever.
Right, whoever is making the calls.
Yeah, your entire compliance program basically lives or dies based on how you define the words you use every single day.
It happens so much more often than anyone in the industry wants to admit, honestly.
So think about when we download a new app on our phones, right? You get that giant scrolling box of text, the terms and conditions.
Oh, yeah, nobody reads that.
Nobody. We just blindly scroll to the bottom, hit accept, and, move on. And the worst thing that happens is you get, like, a bunch of spam emails.
Or they sell your data to advertisers.
Right. But taking that same scroll and click approach to the definition section of 49 CFR Part 382, the FMCSA's drug and alcohol testing regulations, that is a massive trap.
It's catastrophic. You absolutely cannot just skim the definitions.
And that is our mission today. We are looking directly at 49 CFR Section 382.107, and we are going to show you why skipping this seemingly, dry list of terms is the single biggest compliance mistake a motor carrier can make.
To really grasp the gravity here, you have to look at the architecture of the federal regulations.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So you have Part 382, right, which is essentially the mandate. It tells employers who has to be tested, under what circumstances, and, what behaviors are strictly prohibited.
If what, no who.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then sitting right next to it, you have Part 40. And Part 40 is this massive, highly technical document. It dictates the procedural framework.
Like the actual science of it.
Yeah, the science and the administration. How a drug test is physically conducted, how the specimen is collected, how a medical review officer handles the results.
Okay, so where does Section 382.107 fit into all that?
It's the bridge. Section 382.107 connects those two massive bodies of law. It explicitly states that it incorporates definitions from Part 40.
So they are totally intertwined.
Completely intertwined. If you try to run a drug and alcohol program without mastering this specific bridge, you are basically trying to build a skyscraper without a foundation.
It's just going to collapse the second you put any stress on it, like, say, an audit or an accident.
The moment stress is applied, yes, it falls apart.
So let's start with the language itself, because, well, reading this feels like we're stepping into some sort of alternate reality.
It really does.
The Department of Transportation uses everyday English words, but they, hollow them out and fill them with these hyper-specific, legally binding criteria. We are totally abandoning the Merriam-Webster dictionary here.
Yeah, the DOT dictionary is literally the only one that matters in an audit. Or a lawsuit, for that matter.
Why do they do that, though? Why make it so confusing?
Well, the goal of Section 382.107 is absolute uniformity. Think about it. There are hundreds of thousands of motor carriers in the U.S.
Right, massive industry.
So without a rigid, shared vocabulary, a trucking company in Maine and a company in California could read the exact same safety rule, implement it in totally different ways, and both genuinely believe they are fully compliant.
Oh, wow. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which brings us to, honestly, the most foundational concept in this entire industry, the word commerce.
Oh, this is a big one.
Because if I ask anyone on the street what commerce is, they're going to say it's buying and selling stuff. It's retail, it's trade.
Sure, just basic economics.
But under this regulation, commerce isn't just an economic term, is it?
No, not at all. It is the invisible boundary line of federal jurisdiction. It completely determines whether the heavy hand of the federal government applies to your business in the first place.
So how does the DOT define it?
Well, the regulation defines commerce as transportation between a place in one state and a place outside of that state, including transportation outside the U.S.
Okay, that part is pretty intuitive. Interstate travel equals interstate commerce. You cross a border, you're federal.
Right. But there is a massive hook hidden in the second half of that definition.
And this is where it gets scary.
It really does. The text says it also includes transportation within the United States that affects interstate trade, traffic, or transportation.
Okay, I need to put on my skeptical fleet manager hat for a second here, because I know this trips up so many smaller operations.
Let's hear the scenario.
All right, let's say I run a little regional fleet down in Texas. We only do interstate routes. My driver picks up a load in Dallas, drives down I-35, and drops it off in Austin.
Okay, sticking entirely within state lines.
Exactly. The truck never leaves Texas. The driver's CDL's from Texas. The company's registered in Texas. Are you telling me the DOT can still drag me into their federal drug testing jurisdiction?
The short answer is yes.
Wait, really? Even if the tires literally never touch Oklahoma or Louisiana?
Yes. Assuming you are immune to federal oversight simply because your truck's GPS never showed it, crossing a state border is incredibly dangerous.
But why? How does that work?
Because of that key phrase, affecting interstate commerce. The federal government looks at the stream of commerce, not just the physical location of your tires on the
A
pavement.
stream of commerce.
Yeah,
So where the stuff actually came from?
exactly. Where did the goods you are hauling originate? Where are they ultimately going?
Okay, so let's go back to my Texas example.
Mhm.
If I'm hauling, I don't know, auto parts from Dallas to Austin, but those parts were originally manufactured in Monterrey, Mexico,
Right.
and they were brought across the border by a completely different carrier before I picked them up at a warehouse in Dallas.
And you are actively participating in a continuous stream of interstate, and in this case, international commerce.
Even though my guy only drove a couple of hours down the local highway.
Yes. Even though your specific leg of the journey was purely interstate, the cargo itself gives the federal government jurisdiction over your entire operation.
That is wild.
It gets broader. The same applies if you're taking agricultural goods from a farm in California to a packing plant, also in California, but you know those goods are destined to be shipped to New York next week.
So because the economic impact of that freight will eventually cross state lines, my driver is operating in interstate commerce today.
Exactly. The boundary isn't geography.
Wow, so the boundary is the economic trajectory of the cargo itself.
That is the perfect way to put it. And that completely changes how a manager needs to evaluate their compliance requirements.
I mean, you might think you're just this local mom and pop shop, right? Totally exempt from the big, scary DOT rules. But the moment you touch a piece of freight that's part of a national supply chain, boom, you're in the federal arena.
And if you fail to realize that, the consequences are huge. You might fail to implement a federally required drug and alcohol testing program entirely.
Because you just didn't think you had to.
Right. You wouldn't have a random testing pool. You wouldn't be doing pre-employment drug screens under DOT authority.
And then what happens?
Well, when an auditor eventually knocks on your door, or worse, when an accident happens, the fines and the liability for operating completely outside the required federal framework would just be catastrophic. It could end your business.
Okay, so we firmly established that the federal umbrella is much, much wider than people realize. Let's look at what is actually moving under that umbrella.
Sure.
To figure out who has to take a drug test, we actually can't start with the humans, can we? We have to start with the machines.
That's a great point. Yes, you have to define the vehicle first.
So what actually constitutes a commercial motor vehicle, or CMV, under these specific drug testing rules? Because surely it's not every single vehicle a company owns.
Correct. Section 382.107 provides very strict mechanical and operational thresholds. A vehicle triggers these drug and alcohol testing rules if it has a gross vehicle weight rating or gross combination weight rating of 26,001 or more pounds.
Okay, 26,001 pounds. So we're talking about like semi-trucks, heavy box trucks.
Right. It also applies if the vehicle is designed to transport 16 or more passengers, including the driver, like large buses.
Makes sense. But there's a third category, right?
Yes, and this is the one that is so often overlooked. Any size vehicle that is used to transport hazardous materials of a type and quantity that requires placarding under the hazardous materials regulations.
Wait, any size vehicle?
Any size.
So if I have a standard, like, Ford F-150 pickup truck, It weighs maybe 5,000 pounds. It's basically a grocery getter for the company.
Right, a light-duty truck.
But if my company uses it to transport a specific quantity of, say, corrosive chemicals, and I slap a hazmat placard on the tailgate,
Yes.
the person driving that F-150 is suddenly subject to the exact same rigorous federal drug testing program as an over-the-road trucker driving an 80,000-pound 18-wheeler.
Absolutely, 100%.
That is crazy.
It comes down to risk. The presence of the hazardous material elevates the risk profile of the vehicle to a federal level, totally regardless of its weight.
Okay, so hazmat changes everything.
It does, but I have to give a vital warning here. This is buried in the regulatory structure, and it trips people up constantly.
Give it to us.
The FMCSA actually has different definitions of a commercial motor vehicle sprinkled throughout its various regulations.
Oh, you have got to be kidding me.
I wish I was. For instance, in Part 390, which covers general safety rules, a CMV is defined as starting at 10,001 pounds.
10,001 pounds. But Part 382, the drug rules, starts at 26,001. This is where managers lose their minds.
Understandably so, because a manager might look at a 12,000-pound delivery truck and say, okay, under Part 390, this is a commercial motor vehicle, therefore to be safe, I need to put the driver in my DOT random drug testing pool.
Right, that sounds like a responsible manager trying to do the right thing.
But it's actually illegal. Under Part 382, the threshold is 26,001 pounds. Putting a driver of a 12,000-pound non-hazmat vehicle into a federal DOT random testing pool is a violation of federal regulations.
Wait, hold on. I can get in trouble for testing too many people, like for being too safe.
Yes, you cannot test people under DOT authority who do not meet the specific criteria of Section 382.107.
So I just can't drug test those drivers at all?
No, you can absolutely have a private company-sponsored drug testing policy for those later vehicles.
Oh, I see.
But you cannot use the federal DOT forms, procedures, or authority to do it. The federal government strictly limits its invasive testing authority to the operators of those specific heavy or hazardous vehicles.
Blurring the lines between your private company policy and the federal DOT program, that's an audit violation.
A massive audit violation.
Man, so the definitions literally build a fence. You have to know exactly who belongs inside the federal fence and who stays outside.
That's a perfect analogy.
Which brings us to the word that I think creates the most chaos in HR departments across the country: driver.
Oh, yeah. Prepare to throw out everything you know about HR.
Let's do a scenario. Let's say I'm looking at my employee roster. I have 50 people on the payroll. 30 of them have the official job title driver. They drive the big rigs every single day. The other 20 people are, dispatchers, mechanics, safety supervisors, warehouse workers. Common sense says only the 30 people with the title driver need to be in the drug testing program.
Common sense, yes. But regulatory sense, no. Section 382.107 takes a wrecking ball to traditional HR job titles.
It really just obliterates them, doesn't it?
It does. The regulation does not care what is printed on an employee's business card. It doesn't care how payroll classifies them.
So what is a driver legally?
The definition of a driver is simply any person who operates a commercial motor vehicle.
Any person.
Notice the phrasing. It does not say a person whose primary occupation is driving. It says any person.
Let's make this real, because our sources give a scenario that I guarantee happens every single day in this industry.
Repeat it 100 times. Let's hear it.
Okay, I am the director of safety for a mid-sized fleet. I spent 20 years on the road. I still have my active CDL, but I got promoted. Now, I sit behind a desk 99% of the time.
Nice gig.
Yeah, I run safety meetings. I audit logbooks. I talk to insurance agents. I'm not a driver in the operational day-to-day sense.
Right.
But it's Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. A massive client needs a load moved across town immediately, and my last available driver just called in sick. I'm the boss. I want to keep the client happy. So I grabbed the keys. I jumped in a qualifying 26,001-pound truck, and I drive it across town for 2 hours.
And right there, the operational reality just overrode your HR title.
Just because I drove it once.
The moment you took physical control of that qualifying commercial motor vehicle, you became a driver under federal law.
Wow.
If you, as the safety director, were not actively enrolled in the company's DOT random drug and alcohol testing pool because you assumed you were just an office worker, you just operated a commercial vehicle illegally.
And my company is now completely out of compliance.
Exactly.
So driver, in the eyes of the DOT, is a verb, not a noun.
A verb. I love that. Yes.
It's an action you take, not an identity you hold.
That is exactly right. And this encompasses full-time, casual, intermittent, leased, and independent owner-operators.
Anyone who turns the key.
Think about your diesel mechanics. Do they take the trucks out on the highway to test the brakes after a repair?
Yeah, all the time.
If they operate that CMV on a public road, they are a driver, period. Think about the warehouse manager who occasionally moves a fully loaded tractor trailer across the street to a secondary lot. If they are operating a qualifying vehicle, they fall under the definition.
It's a massive paradigm shift. You can't just look at a spreadsheet of job titles. You have to physically look at reality. Who is getting behind the wheel of your heavy machinery?
Even if it's for 1 hour a year, that person must be in the DOT program.
Okay, so let's assume a manager has mapped all this out correctly. They have the right vehicles identified. They have every single person who ever touches a steering wheel enrolled in the program.
A gold star for that manager.
Right. But the next trap is time.
Yes, the clock.
When do these strict prohibitions against drug and alcohol use actually apply? Because a truck driver isn't just a robot that turns off when the engine stops.
No, they aren't. And this brings us to the definition of a safety-sensitive function.
Right.
Many people operate under what I call the moving truck myth.
The moving truck myth?
Yeah, they believe that a driver is only under the purview of safety regulations when they are physically navigating the vehicle down the highway.
Like hands on the wheel, foot on the gas.
Exactly. But the regulation makes it crystal clear that the scope of safety-sensitive functions is remarkably broad, much broader than just driving.
The source material lists specific activities. I mean, it's all time spent at the plant, terminal, or facility waiting to be dispatched.
Yeah.
It's inspecting equipment, servicing the vehicle, conditioning it,
Yeah.
loading or unloading, supervising the loading,
Right.
or even just remaining in readiness to operate the vehicle.
That's the kicker. The clock starts the moment a driver begins to work, or is required to be in readiness to work.
Required to be in readiness.
And it does not stop until the driver is completely relieved from work and all responsibility for performing work.
Required to be in readiness. That is such a fascinating phrase. Let's look at another real-world scenario from the sources because this one really surprised me.
Go for it.
A driver shows up to the terminal on a Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. Their dispatcher says, hey, your trailer isn't loaded yet. It's going to be a couple of hours. Go hang out.
Very common.
Right. So the driver goes into the driver's lounge. The truck is parked 100 yards away. Engine is cold. Keys are in the driver's pocket. The driver sinks into this comfortable recliner, puts on a pair of headphones, and starts watching a movie on an iPad while drinking a coffee.
Sounds relaxing.
Yeah, if I'm a manager walking past that lounge, I see a guy relaxing. He is completely disconnected from the 80,000-pound machine. But you are saying the federal government views him entirely differently in that moment?
Night and day difference. The federal government views that driver as actively performing a safety-sensitive function.
But he's watching a movie. How?
Look at the criteria. Ready to perform or immediately available to perform. If that dispatcher were to walk into the lounge 5 minutes later and say, okay, trailer's ready, let's go, that driver is expected to get up and drive, right?
Yeah, that's their job.
Because they have not been formally relieved of their responsibilities by the employer. They are on the clock, under employer control, and therefore in a safety-sensitive status.
Okay, but why does this semantic difference matter so much? Because if they're just sitting there, what's the harm?
The harm comes into play with the prohibitions. Under DOT rules, a driver cannot perform safety-sensitive functions within 4 hours of using alcohol, or while having an alcohol concentration of 0.02 or greater.
Wait, I see where this is going.
What if there is something a little extra in that coffee the driver is drinking in the lounge?
Oh, wow. If the driver spiked their coffee with Baileys while watching that movie in the lounge.
They are consuming alcohol while performing a safety-sensitive function. That is an immediate catastrophic DOT violation.
But a manager might just think, well, as long as he sobers up before he actually gets in the truck in 2 hours, it's fine.
The regulation strictly says otherwise. The compliance clock is ticking the second they are available to you.
What if the driver isn't in a terminal? What if they are out on the road, the truck breaks down, and they're just sitting on the shoulder of the interstate waiting for a tow truck?
Remaining in attendance of a disabled vehicle is explicitly defined as a safety-sensitive function.
Even if it can't move?
Even if it can't move, because they are responsible for the hazard that vehicle poses to the public on that shoulder.
So how does a driver ever actually stop performing safety-sensitive functions? Like, how do they turn it off?
They have to be formally relieved of duty and all responsibility. Or they must be resting in a qualifying sleeper berth that meets specific FMCSA engineering standards.
So just taking a nap across the front seats of the cab doesn't count.
It does not take you out of safety-sensitive status, no. The documentation and communication from management must explicitly release the driver from being immediately available.
This forces managers to deeply evaluate how they communicate with their workforce. You can't just leave drivers in this weird limbo.
Exactly. Limbo is dangerous.
All right, so the manager understands who the driver is, and they understand when the driver is legally on the clock. Now we arrive at, honestly, the most difficult interpersonal moment a manager can face.
Confronting an employee.
Yeah. Confronting an employee about suspected drug or alcohol use.
It's awful, but it's part of the job.
And the regulation has two distinct pathways for this.
Right.
And mixing them up can apparently destroy a company's legal defense.
It will shred it. We need to dissect the difference between actual knowledge and reasonable suspicion.
But first, let's start with defining alcohol itself, because again, the DOT has its own reality.
They certainly do. The DOT defines alcohol broadly as the intoxicating agent in beverage alcohol, ethyl alcohol, or other low molecular weight alcohols, including methyl and isopropyl alcohol.
Okay, science class, but
Practically, alcohol use is defined as the drinking or swallowing of any beverage, liquid mixture, preparation, or medication containing alcohol.
medication. We have to highlight that. We are talking about NyQuil, right?
Yes.
We are talking about certain cough syrups. We're talking about some kombuchas.
The DOT does not care about the packaging. They do not care about your intent.
So if a driver takes a swig of a highly alcoholic cough syrup right before jumping in the cab to soothe a sore throat.
They're treated exactly the same under the regulations as a driver who took a shot of tequila.
Wow.
The federal government is solely concerned with the chemical presence of an intoxicating substance while performing a safety-sensitive function.
So keeping that in mind, let's talk about actual knowledge. The source defines this as an employer having direct, undeniable knowledge that a driver has used alcohol or controlled substances based on very specific criteria.
Those criteria are very strict. Direct observation of the employee using alcohol or a controlled substance, information provided by a previous employer, a traffic citation for driving a CMV while under the influence, or an employee's direct admission of use.
Okay, I'm going to throw a scenario at you, and I am going to push back hard on the regulatory logic here.
All right, let's hear it.
Because this is where the system feels completely broken to a layperson.
Mm-hmm.
I am the terminal manager. It's 6:00 a.m.
Mm.
One of my veteran drivers walks through the front door to grab his dispatch paperwork.
Okay.
He is stumbling over his own feet. He is swaying violently. His eyes are bloodshot. He is slurring his words so badly I can barely understand him. And the smell of cheap whiskey radiating off him is just overpowering.
Not a good look.
As a manager, I am looking at a drunk person. I have eyeballs, I have a nose, I have common sense, I have actual knowledge that this man is intoxicated, right?
Based on the strict definition in Section 382.107, no. You do not have actual knowledge.
That makes absolutely no sense. I can smell the liquor on his breath from 5 feet away. How can the federal government tell me I don't know he's drunk?
Because the federal government draws a hard line between observing an action and observing a symptom.
An action versus a symptom.
Right. Slurred speech, stumbling, the odor of alcohol, those are behavioral and physical characteristics. The regulation explicitly states that observing physical or behavioral characteristics alone does not constitute direct observation for the purposes of actual knowledge.
So what does direct observation actually mean then?
It means seeing the literal consumption of the prohibited substance.
Like watching him drink it.
Exactly. If you walked into the parking lot and saw that driver sitting in his personal car, holding a flask of whiskey to his lips and swallowing, that is direct observation.
Yeah.
You witnessed the act of consumption.
But seeing him stumble into the office 30 minutes later.
You are witnessing the aftermath, the symptoms.
Okay, I see the semantic difference, but practically, why does the DOT care? Either way, the guy is too drunk to drive a truck. I have to pull him off the road.
You absolutely have to pull him off the road, but the difference lies in the regulatory procedure you must use to do it.
Okay, break that down for me.
If you have actual knowledge, say you saw him drink from the flask, the violation has already been established. You remove him, and the DOT return-to-duty process begins immediately.
Done deal.
Right. But if you only observe the symptoms, the stumbling, the smell, You are in the territory of reasonable suspicion.
Okay, reasonable suspicion.
Under Section 382.307, reasonable suspicion requires you to document those specific physical and behavioral observations and then mandate that the driver take a reasonable suspicion drug or alcohol test.
So you need the test to prove it.
Yes. The test result is what establishes the violation in that case, not your observation.
So I mix these up. If I just fire the stumbling guy and log it as an actual knowledge violation without sending him for a test, what happens?
You have violated his due process under the regulations.
Oh, man.
The driver can appeal. They can argue they had a medical emergency that mimicked intoxication, like diabetic ketoacidosis, which can actually cause stumbling and a fruity, alcohol-like breath odor.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think of that.
If you didn't follow the reasonable suspicion testing protocol to scientifically prove the presence of alcohol, any disciplinary action you took based on DOT regulations could be completely invalidated.
Still, it could sue me.
You could face wrongful termination suits, and the DOT will cite you for failing to follow testing procedures.
That is terrifying. You really have to know exactly which regulatory box you are standing in before you make a move.
Absolutely.
Let's look at another pathway to actual knowledge. The admission.
This is a tricky one, too.
Yeah, so a driver walks into my office, shuts the door, looks at the floor, and says, "Boss, I have a problem. I smoked meth this morning before I came in."
An admission of prohibited use made to the employer, assuming it doesn't fall under a specific pre-existing voluntary self-identification program that the company has meticulously set up beforehand, constitutes actual knowledge.
But the human instinct for a manager in that incredibly stressful moment is to seek confirmation.
Right, you want proof.
Yeah. The manager might say, "Okay, John, I hear you, but I need proof for the file. I am going to officially send you down the street for a reasonable suspicion drug test right now. We will let the lab confirm it."
And that is a massive procedural error.
Why?
The source text explicitly warns against this. A company should not decide to send a driver for a reasonable suspicion test and treat the situation as if the admission never occurred.
But why not? The test is more scientific than a verbal confession.
Because the moment the driver confessed, they violated the regulations based on the definition of actual knowledge. The violation is complete right then and there. The return to duty process is triggered.
So by testing them, I'm complicating things.
By trying to pivot to a reasonable suspicion test, the manager is essentially ignoring a known federal violation and hoping a laboratory can recreate it.
Oh, I see. What if the test is delayed?
Exactly. What if the specimen is mishandled at the lab and comes back negative?
Oh, geez.
You now have a negative test result for a driver who already admitted to using meth. You have created a massive legal contradiction for your company. You cannot use a reasonable suspicion test to paper over an actual knowledge admission.
You just have to trust the definition and act on it. You can't hedge your bets.
Correct.
Okay, let's follow the thread of a test being ordered. A manager correctly identifies reasonable suspicion, or perhaps a driver's name just gets pulled from the random testing pool.
Standard procedure.
The manager hands the driver the paperwork and says, "You have been selected for a random drug test. Proceed to the clinic immediately."
And then what does the driver do?
Well, let's say the driver looks at the paper, crumples it up, throws it on the floor, says, "I'm not doing that," walks up to their car, and drives home.
Well, that is a clear refusal. The manager logs it, the driver is removed from safety-sensitive functions. Boom.
Easy. But what if the driver doesn't say a single word? What if the refusal isn't verbal?
Ha. This is perhaps the most dangerous misunderstanding in the entire industry. The definition of a refusal to submit is incredibly broad, and it is almost entirely conduct-based.
Conduct-based.
Relying on a driver to verbally declare, "I refuse," will get a motor carrier into deep, deep trouble.
So the source outlines several specific behaviors that constitute a refusal, like failing to appear for any test within a reasonable time,
Yes.
failing to remain at the testing site until the testing process is complete, failing to provide a urine specimen, failing to permit the observation if it's required.
Or failing to provide a sufficient amount of urine when directed without an adequate medical explanation, or simply engaging in conduct that clearly obstructs the testing process.
Let's unpack a real-life scenario because the nuances here are critical. Let's talk about the clinic waiting room.
A classic.
Right. A driver arrives at the third-party medical clinic for their random drug test. It's a Tuesday afternoon during flu season. The waiting room is packed with coughing people.
Nobody wants to be there.
No. The receptionist says it will be at least an hour wait. So the driver sits there for 45 minutes, They are getting incredibly frustrated. They know they have a load of perishable goods waiting at the terminal that needs to get to Chicago by tomorrow morning.
The clock is ticking on the freight.
Exactly. Finally, the driver throws their hands up, says to the receptionist, "Look, I don't have time for this," walks out of the clinic, and drives back to the terminal.
This scenario is a massive compliance trap for managers.
So the manager gets a phone call from the clinic stating that the driver left before providing a sample. The manager, thinking pragmatically about the freight and the schedule, assumes, well, no test was taken, there is no positive result from the lab, no harm, no foul. We will just send him back to the clinic tomorrow morning when it's less busy.
And that feels like a reasonable business decision, right?
Totally reasonable. Keep the freight moving.
But it is a catastrophic regulatory failure. Under Section 382.107, failing to remain at the testing site until the testing process is complete is legally defined as a refusal to submit.
Period.
Period. And a refusal carries the exact same weight and consequences as a verified positive drug test.
Wait, so by walking out of that waiting room, that driver effectively failed a drug test in the eyes of the federal government?
Yes. They must be immediately removed from all safety-sensitive functions. They cannot drive a commercial vehicle until they complete the extensive DOT return-to-duty process.
Which takes a long time, right?
Oh, it involves a substance abuse professional, education, treatment, and years of follow-up testing.
Just for walking out of a waiting room.
Yes. And the text explicitly cautions employers here. It says managers must make these decisions according to DOT rules, not personal opinions.
Because if I am that manager, I sympathize with my driver. I understand the pressure of the supply chain. I might think, I would have walked out of that flu-ridden waiting room too. The driver was just trying to do their job.
But your sympathy as a manager is legally irrelevant. The DOT does not care about your freight schedule. If the conduct meets the definition of a refusal, you must enforce it as a refusal.
What happens if I don't?
Consider the liability. If you let that driver get into an 80,000-pound truck the next day because you decided to ignore their walkout, and they cause a fatal accident on the interstate. During the subsequent investigation, it will be discovered that the driver had legally refused a DOT drug test the day prior, and you allowed them to drive anyway.
Oh my God.
Your company will be held liable for putting a federally disqualified driver behind the wheel. It is the kind of negligence that bankrupts companies and sends executives to prison.
Over a walkout. That is intense. But what about the physical inability to provide a sample? Like the shy bladder scenario. A driver goes to the clinic, tries to give a urine sample, but just can't produce enough volume.
Right, that happens. And that triggers a very specific, heavily regulated procedure under Part 40. The driver is given fluids and a specific amount of time, usually 3 hours, to try again.
And if they still can't?
If they still cannot provide a sufficient specimen, the employer must direct the driver to obtain a medical evaluation from a physician acceptable to the medical review officer.
Okay, so a doctor gets involved.
Yes.
Yeah.
If the physician determines there is a legitimate physiological or psychological medical condition that precluded the driver from providing the sample, the test is canceled.
What?
But if the physician determines there is no valid medical explanation for the inability to provide the sample,
Then the failure to provide the specimen becomes a refusal to submit.
Exactly. Again, the manager does not get to play doctor and say, oh, John just gets nervous in public restrooms. It's fine. The medical evaluation dictates the outcome. The definitions force the manager to rely on established scientific procedures, not their own intuition.
Let's shift gears from random tests to the most chaotic environment a manager deals with: accidents.
Yes, post-accident testing.
Drug and alcohol testing isn't just about random pulls or suspicious behavior. It is a mandatory federal requirement following certain crashes. But, just like everything else we've discussed, you don't just blindly test after every single fender bender.
No, you don't. Overtesting is just as much of a regulatory violation as undertesting.
Wait, really? Overtesting is a violation?
Yes. You can't use DOT authority unless the specific triggers are met. And the trigger for post-accident testing often hinges on one highly scrutinized definition: disabling damage.
Disabling damage. The source defines disabling damage as damage that precludes departure of a motor vehicle from the scene of the accident in its usual manner in daylight after simple repairs.
Notice the layers in that definition. Precludes departure in its usual manner.
So if a truck could technically be driven away, but doing so would cause, like, the bumper to drag on the pavement and shred the tires, that's not departing in its usual manner.
Correct. That would absolutely be disabling damage.
Yeah. But the text is very careful to list explicit exclusions. It states that disabling damage does not include damage to motor vehicles that could have been driven, but would have been further damaged if so driven. Wait, let me reread that.
Take your time, it's dense.
Damage that would not further damage the vehicle. Okay. It explicitly excludes damage to tires, headlights, taillights, turn signals, horn, or windshield wipers that makes them inoperative. It also excludes camouflage damage or dents.
This is a vital checklist for a safety manager who is evaluating an accident scene. And remember, they're usually doing this over a grainy cell phone picture at 2:00 in the morning.
Oh yeah, never happens at noon on a Tuesday.
Exactly. So let's look at a scenario. A driver is backing into a loading dock and misjudges the angle. They scrape the side of the trailer against a concrete pylon. It tears off a taillight assembly and puts a massive dent in the side of the trailer.
Okay. The local police show up. They write a report. Does the manager mandate a post-accident drug and alcohol test?
Well, let's go down the checklist. Was there a fatality? Was anyone transported away from the scene for medical treatment?
Yeah.
Was a citation issued to the CMV driver for a moving violation? Let's say no.
No citation.
Therefore, the only remaining trigger for a mandatory test would be if a vehicle had to be towed away due to disabling damage.
Okay.
So look at the exclusions. A broken taillight and a dent. Does that prevent the vehicle from departing in its usual manner after simple repairs? No. Is it disabling damage? No.
But what if the fleet manager looks at the dent and says, look, I don't want the driver taking that trailer on the highway. It looks terrible, and I don't want to risk a DOT inspection for the broken light. Just call a tow truck to haul the trailer to the body shop.
And this is where the trap snaps shut on the manager.
Let me guess, a tow truck doesn't always equal disabling damage.
Exactly. A manager cannot simply assume that the presence of a tow truck automatically equals disabling damage. If a truck is towed for convenience, or for cosmetic reasons, or because it's stuck in a muddy ditch and needs a winch out but has no actual mechanical damage, that is a tow, but it is not disabling damage under the definition.
And if the manager forces the driver to take a DOT post-accident test anyway?
They have violated the driver's rights. You cannot use federal DOT authority to compel a drug test if the specific regulatory triggers haven't been met. The manager applied the everyday definition of a bad accident instead of the DOT's definition of disabling damage.
It requires an incredibly cool head. You have to put aside the panic of the accident and clinically evaluate the mechanical state of the vehicle against a federal checklist.
It's a lot to ask, but it's required.
All right, let's assume a test is properly mandated. The driver provides a sample. We need to talk about the science of testing and how managers interact with the results, because there was a whole separate vocabulary for the laboratory work.
Yes. Section 382.107 differentiates carefully between a screening test and a confirmation test.
A screening test or initial test is just the first pass, right? It's an analytical procedure to determine whether a driver may have a prohibited concentration of drugs or alcohol in their system.
It's a wide net. It identifies if a specimen requires further, more detailed analysis.
And the confirmatory drug test is a second analytical procedure performed on a different aliquot of the original specimen to identify and quantify the exact presence of a specific drug or metabolite.
Correct. But this data doesn't just get emailed directly from the scientist in a lab coat to a trucking dispatcher.
That would be too easy.
And illegal. It goes through a highly regulated chain of custody involving two key definitions: the licensed medical practitioner, the LMP, and the medical review officer, the MRO.
The MRO.
The MRO is arguably one of the most critical safeguards in the entire DOT testing program. An MRO is a licensed physician who is responsible for receiving and reviewing laboratory results generated by an employer's drug testing program and evaluating medical explanations for certain drug test results.
Why do we need them, though? If the lab says there are amphetamines in the urine, why can't the manager just get that piece of paper and fire their driver?
Because the federal government recognizes that a positive laboratory result does not automatically equate to illicit drug use, the MRO acts as an independent medical gatekeeper. Their job is to protect the integrity of the science and the rights of the driver.
Okay, give me an example of how that works.
If a lab reports a positive result for amphetamines, the MRO doesn't just call the boss. The MRO will contact the driver directly. The MRO will conduct a medical interview. They will ask, do you have a valid, legally prescribed medication that would cause this result?
Like Adderall for ADHD.
Exactly. If the driver provides a valid prescription and the MRO verifies it with the prescribing pharmacy, the MRO will downgrade that positive laboratory result and report it to the employer as a negative test.
Wait, so the employer never even knows?
The employer never even knows that amphetamines were found because the MRO determined there was a legitimate medical explanation.
The manager's blind to it, by design.
By design, yes, to protect medical privacy.
Which brings up a massive warning flag in the source text. the concept of the stand-down. What is a stand-down, and why are managers explicitly warned against doing it?
A stand-down is the practice of an employer temporarily removing an employee from the performance of safety-sensitive functions based solely on a preliminary, unverified laboratory report showing a positive result before the MRO has completed their official verification process.
Okay, so the lab runs the initial screening. It pops positive. The lab notifies the MRO. But somehow, the employer gets wind of this initial unverified hit.
It happens.
The manager panics. They say, I can't have this guy driving while we wait 3 days for the MRO to track him down and do an interview. Pull him off the road right now.
That instinct to protect the public is totally understandable. But the DOT strictly prohibits it unless an employer has applied for and received a very specific formal waiver from the FMCSA.
But why? Isn't it safer to just sideline them?
Because a manager should not play doctor or lab technician, remember the Adderall example,
Right.
that initial positive might be completely legal and medically sound. If you pull a driver off the road, disrupting their livelihood, potentially humiliating them in front of their peers based on unverified data, you are violating the confidentiality and due process built into the MRO system.
You're jumping the gun.
You are acting on incomplete information. Until the MRO completes their medical review and officially verifies the result as positive, the employer is jumping the gun, and doing so is a regulatory violation.
It all comes back to authority.
Right.
Knowing who has the authority to make which decision at what time, which is a perfect bridge into our final and perhaps most vital set of definitions. We have spent, well, a long time talking about incredibly complex rules.
It's a lot to digest.
We've talked about supply chain jurisdictions, vehicle weights, behavioral observation protocols, medical review officers, and laboratory science.
Yeah.
If I'm a trucking company owner whose primary job is fixing diesel engines and finding freight, my first thought is, this is way too complicated. I'm going to make a smart business decision and hire an outside vendor, an expert, to handle all of this for me.
And that is a very common and, frankly, very necessary business decision for most motor carriers. They use service agents.
Right.
But this is where the definitions of employer, CTPA, and DER become the most important words a manager will ever read because they dictate exactly who is legally responsible when things go wrong.
Let's start with the big one, employer. The regulation defines the employer as any person, including the United States, a state, or a political subdivision of a state, who owns or leases a commercial motor vehicle or assigns employees to operate such a vehicle. The employer is responsible for the overall implementation of the DOT program.
The fundamental compliance principle here is ownership. The motor carrier owns its compliance program, full stop.
But what about the CTPA, the consortium or third-party administrator? The text defines them as a service agent that provides or coordinates one or more drug and/or alcohol testing services to employers. They manage the random testing pools, they coordinate the collection sites, they handle the administrative paperwork.
Yes, they do a lot of the heavy lifting.
So if I am paying a CTPA a hefty monthly retainer to run my drug program, haven't I essentially outsourced my liability to them? They are the experts.
The regulation contains one critical sentence that should be framed and hung on the wall of every trucking manager's office in America.
What is it?
CTPAs are not employers for the purposes of Part 382.
You can outsource the work, but you cannot outsource the responsibility.
Exactly. Hiring a drug testing vendor does not transform that vendor into the motor carrier.
Give me a scenario where this bites a company.
Let's say you hire a CTPA to manage your random testing pool. You send them your updated driver roster every quarter. But the CTPA's software has a glitch, and they accidentally drop 3 of your most active drivers out of the testing pool for an entire year.
Okay, an honest tech mistake.
Sure. An FMCSA auditor comes to your office, they find the error, they note that you failed to meet your required random testing percentages for the year.
Well, the manager's going to point at the vendor and say, it's their fault. Fine them. I paid them to do it right.
And the auditor will calmly explain that the DOT does not regulate or fine the CTPA for that error. They fine you, the employer.
Even though the vendor made the mistake.
Yes. Because under the definition of employer, it is your overall responsibility to ensure the program is implemented correctly. You are expected to audit your own vendors. You are expected to double-check their work. If your vendor fails, the federal government views it as your failure.
That is a bitter pill to swallow for a small business owner. It means you can never truly wash your hands of the regulatory burden.
Never.
Which brings us to the final definition, the DER. The designated employer representative. This is an individual identified by the employer as able to receive communications and test results from service agents. More importantly, this is the person authorized to take immediate actions to remove employees from safety-sensitive duties.
The DE is where the rubber meets the road.
Here is my crucial question as a manager who just realized they can't outsource liability. I don't want to be the bad guy.
Who does?
Right. I don't want to be the one to call a driver who has been with me for 10 years and tell them their career is over because they failed a drug test. Can I just make my vendor, my CTPA, the DER, so they can handle all the bad news and formally pull the drivers?
A definitive, absolute no. The regulation explicitly states that a service agent cannot serve as the DER.
Why, if I'm paying them?
Because pulling a driver off the road requires direct operational authority over that employee. A third-party vendor sitting in an office 3 states away cannot walk out onto the loading dock, take the keys out of a driver's hand, and order them to go home.
Only the employer has that direct control.
Therefore, the DR must be an internal employee of the motor carrier.
So as a manager, I have to look my driver in the eye.
Yes. You can use vendors to facilitate the process, but the motor carrier fundamentally must have internal management knowledgeable enough to spot when the vendor is missing something and authoritative enough to take immediate, unflinching action when a violation occurs.
Wow. Let's pull all of this together. We have gone on a massive, detailed journey through the fine print of federal regulations.
It's been a ride.
We've seen that these definitions aren't a glossary at the back of a textbook. They are the literal boundaries of a motor carrier's operational reality.
Exactly.
The definition of commerce determines if the federal government is watching you. The definition of driver determines who you have to monitor, regardless of what HR says. Safety-sensitive function determines exactly when the clock is ticking on your liability, even if the driver is just sitting in a break room.
Yep.
Actual knowledge and refusal determine what constitutes a career-altering violation and how you must legally respond. And employer and DER determine who is left holding the bag and paying the fines at the end of the day.
And it is crucial to understand that all of this internal compliance we've discussed today doesn't just stay in a filing cabinet in your HR office anymore.
That's a good point.
We have to connect these definitions back to the Commercial Driver's License Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse.
The federal database.
Yes. The clearinghouse is the ultimate destination for all of this data. When you log an actual knowledge violation, or an MRO reports a verified positive test, or you determine a driver committed a refusal to submit by walking out of a clinic, that information is uploaded to a secure federal information system.
For everyone to see.
Exactly. The entire purpose of the clearinghouse is to prevent prohibited drivers from just quitting your company after a violation and getting hired by a different carrier down the street without their history being known. It creates transparency across the entire industry.
Which leads us with a final, incredibly sobering thought for you, the trucking manager listening to this right now.
Yeah.
Because these violations, these refusals, and these return-to-duty statuses are permanently logged into a federal database, your interpretation of these definitions isn't just an internal paperwork matter anymore.
It goes way beyond your office.
If you misunderstand what constitutes a refusal, or if you fail to grasp the nuance between actual knowledge and reasonable suspicion, you aren't just risking a fine for your company during a DOT audit. You are actively shaping a permanent national digital safety record that follows that driver for the rest of their natural career.
It's a huge deal.
If you incorrectly classify a situation as a refusal because you didn't understand the medical review process, you might unjustly end a driver's career. Conversely, if you fail to identify an actual knowledge situation because you think you need a lab test to prove it, you are allowing a dangerous driver to slip through the cracks and potentially kill someone on the highway.
Your understanding of this vocabulary literally dictates their livelihood and the safety of the public across the entire supply chain.
It is a massive, heavy responsibility. You don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be a laboratory technician. But you absolutely have to know what these words mean when you apply them to your workforce.
Are you sure you know what they mean for your fleet?
Exactly. Before your next driver hits the road, we highly encourage you to pull up 49 CFR section 382.107. Put it side by side with your company's drug and alcohol policy and see if your vocabulary matches the federal reality. Do not wait for a plaintiff's attorney to ask you for your definitions in a deposition. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the regulations. Stay safe out there.